Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming in. We're going to give people a minute or so to come in. I see a lot of people trickling in. We will be back in about a minute.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you're here already, go ahead and say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. Gina and I are on the West Coast, so it's Pacific time.
Relatively early.
Depending what time you wake up, you know?
Well, not that early for me.
Same. Seeing a lot of new names coming in. Go ahead and say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. We'll get started in about a minute. All right. You ready, June? I'll kick us off.
So.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Speed Up Time to your next scientific breakthrough. I'm seeing a lot of new names here. Go ahead and say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. We'll say hi back. A couple housekeeping items. So we'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in there. We might be holding them to the end, but go ahead and drop them in there as they come up. And we will be sending out the recording and the slides to everyone who registered later on today. So hello everyone, I am Allison Carpio. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at CodeOcean, and I want to introduce you to our host today, June Snedeker, the Head of Application Sciences here at CodeOcean. She's worked with NGS data for the past 8 years and designed and deployed analysis tools like the RNA fusion calling portion of TrueSight Oncology 500, that's TrueSight Tumor 170, and the SNP kinship analysis for Verigen's Kintelligence platform. So before we get into it, real quick, CodeOcean about us. It's a digital lab for R&D, and it's the first and only that brings together your extended science team in one shared collaborative space so you can achieve trusted scientific discoveries in half the time. And today what we're going to go through is we'll go over the common challenges for science teams. We're going to go in the day in the life of each of the different roles of every part of the science team, and then some success stories from the field, just so you can see what's really possible here. And then we're going to give you a peek of the apps library that just launched this week. So with that, I'll hand it over to June.
Sure, and I think I'm just going to quickly kick this off with an audience poll. This is slightly facetious, but it kind of is going to encapsulate what we're pretty much going to cover today. So the first poll question we have is, who are you in your soul? Basically, this has nothing to do with your job title. It's who you imagine yourself to be and where you'd like to be in terms of what your day-to-day looks like. So I'm just going to quickly launch that poll, and we'll give everybody a minute or two to respond. Okie dokie, so that's pretty much most people. Just to show, most of you are in the computational science bucket. There are a few people who are on the bench scientist side and a few decision makers hiding out there. And so the next question that we have for everybody is basically, who do you spend most of your time pretending to be? What in your day-to-day life, who do you spend a lot of time trying to do that job, even though you don't necessarily have that job? We'll give a couple seconds for that. All right, and I think most people have voted. And just to share, it's pretty much the breakdown that I would have expected, which is that a lot of computational scientists spend a lot of time in the DevOps role, whether or not that's somewhere that they would like to be. So that just is kind of a, Allison sort of gave you the overview of what CodeOcean is about, but basically what I want to dive into is the details of how CodeOcean solves the different problems for different people on a team of researchers, and also just kind of our overall very distilled mission statement, which is just we want to be able to take care of the boring parts of computational research so that you don't have to. There is a lot of sort of housekeeping and other things that go along with being able to do research and analyze data that aren't necessarily that interesting in and of themselves. They just have to get done. And so the goal with CodeOcean is that we should be able to take care of a lot of that for you, and you don't have to think about it. So we're going to start with sort of explaining each of these roles and the different problems that they're all facing in their day-to-day, and then kind of go over a day in the life in CodeOcean and how CodeOcean fits in with some of those problems. So we're going to start with DevOps because that's sort of the role that everything else relies upon in a lot of ways. You need DevOps in order to get anything done if you're working with computers. And one of the major problems that DevOps is responsible for is costs. So if you are starting from scratch, especially hiring new resources, building your whole infrastructure, that all comes with high costs. So people cost money, hardware costs money, services cost money. So if you're buying, services from elsewhere, you need to be able to pay for that. You also need people who need to set them up. You need to have a lot of that infrastructure handled in some way or another, and often that comes with high costs. The other thing is, once you set up that infrastructure, you need to tell people where it is and how to use it. So if somebody gets hired into your company, you have to spend a lot of time just telling them where everything is and what is available to them. So if you have, clusters that you're using, where's the documentation for the tools that are being used? What specific servers does a specific person need access to? If I'm using AWS, what security groups do I need to be a part of in order to get my work done day to day? And also, if they aren't as familiar necessarily with all the technology, getting them up to speed on each piece of that. So at the end of the day, DevOps is also responsible for anything that breaks. And on that last point, that's not necessarily stuff that is officially what DevOps is responsible for. So even though it is entirely outside of the DevOps remit, if an intern 5 years ago wrote a Perl script that did something and it worked 5 years ago and suddenly it breaks, that suddenly becomes a DevOps problem, even though that is totally not what they're intended to be doing with their day-to-day. So you can get caught in a very big spiral of just handling user requests for various things that go wrong all over the organization, and that's not really where you want to be spending your time. So moving on to the computational science side, there are hard things on that as well. And one of the major things is that machine learning is hard and IT is hard. So to be specific about what that means, CUDA is a pain in the half to set up, and you have to be intimately familiar with how NVIDIA and Google or AWS has decided to tackle that particular problem. There's a lot of great stuff out there, and there are a lot of people who are working on various cool models that do things that you want to be able to access. But unless you have somebody who is kind to you and built you a container for their tool, or has, been really rigorous about documentation, you may have to build your own wrapper or your own Conda environment. And you also need to keep track of that stuff for anybody else who needs to use your tools. So even though it's not something where you may be distributing throughout the entire company, even if another computational scientist needs to use the things that you're doing, you have to be rigorous about documenting how you set things up, where they are, and that's not necessarily a fun part of your day either. The other thing is that sometimes you will actually need to distribute something that the entire company needs to use. Pipeline development is a big part of what computational scientists are responsible for, and it's not necessarily the most exciting part of what you're doing in your day-to-day. And there are a couple challenges associated with it. Bioinformatics tools tend to be bad, and to be specific about that, bioinformaticians are not software developers, and that's fine. But the tools that they make reflect this, especially if you're working in the open source space. There's definitely a variety of people out there with a variety of different abilities on how they structure things and how easy they make it for somebody else to use and how careful they are about documentation. So even if there is something out there that does what you want end to end, like Galaxy or NF Core, you often need to tweak things in order to get it to do exactly what you want it to do. And that can be time consuming and also requires you to learn whatever framework the tool is using. So maybe you don't want to spend your time learning how to do SnakeMake or Nextflow. And so that is a time sink that you can get caught in pretty easily. The other thing is that if you want to be able to deploy it to anybody, if you're doing it on a cluster, you need to document how to do it on a cluster. But if you're deploying to the cloud, you also need to know how to deploy to the cloud. And that can be a little bit challenging, especially if you're not as familiar with that infrastructure. It often requires DevOps support. And it also can be a little bit scary until you know what you're doing, depending on what sort of how close to that DevOps hat you are. You may or may not have a lot of experience working with how AWS does things, and you don't necessarily want to be the person who gets a note from IT saying you spent $1,000 by accidentally recursively launching a bunch of jobs. So the other thing is that you also are going to be wearing the support hat sometimes. The other scientists need access to your results, so you need to be available to tell them how you got what you got and how you actually ran your data. And people also need to be able to analyze their own data. So other people having access to your results, you have to be very careful about documenting how you got everything, what you did. And sometimes that can kind of fall apart, especially if you are just poking around and trying a bunch of different things. Documenting that all at the end sometimes is the first things to go when you get busy. So basically that is something that people try to be good about, but there's always going to be gaps, and that's just kind of how things work most of the time. And also because people need to be able to analyze their own data, you need to be able to explain how to run various analyses and also make a friendly enough front end that they can get things working themselves. So a lot of what you're going to be doing is documentation and reporting. You need to know how you got your results and you need to explain them. And the amount of detail that goes into that kind of documentation is going to vary depending on the person, but also depending on just how much time is available. This is always something that people want to be good about, and then it always is going to be the first thing that does not happen when you get a million requests in that you need to address that day. So you don't want to be a human command line generator for people, so you need to provide tools that other people can use, and you also want to be able to have things somewhat self-documenting so that you don't have to spend all your day just explaining what you're doing. On the bench scientist side, you don't necessarily want to be talking to the computational scientists for every single little thing that you want to try out or every single thing that you want to do. So even if you're not looking at something complicated, you need to know where the data is and how to access the results that the computational scientists have generated. And sometimes that's not trivial. You also want to be able to go back to old results, and those are not always stored in a way that's systematically understandable to the person who didn't put them there. So the worst case scenario is always, somebody's got a external hard drive that they've attached to their own laptop. But even if it's on AWS on an S3 bucket, you still need to know where that is and how to get access to it. And then on the last point, Excel can only do so much. So basically, there are going to be times where you need a more complicated analysis, and you often have to rely on computational scientists to do that, or you need to set up available tools yourself, which goes back to a lot of the problems that computational scientists are dealing with, where often those tools are not designed to be easy to deploy for somebody just because they're volunteer projects, and that may or may not be the focus of the person who wrote it. So you want to be able to look at things, you want to be able to synthesize the information that you have. At the end of the day, bench scientists need to be able to synthesize information from their experiments and come up with new ideas. And often that involves a lot of working with computational data. The level of access that you may have is going to be different depending on how things are set up at your particular location. So this is kind of slightly facetious, but basically this is covering what do you want to be able to do in your workday. So this is another poll just to kind of cover what kind of things actually excite you about what you're doing in your day-to-day. So do you want to be performing novel data analysis? Do you want to build new algorithms to solve scientific problems? You want to set up CUDA for the 15th time on AWS? You want to write documentation for the location of each HPC cluster, along with all the associated drives and data locations and more for new hires? So basically, what would you want to be doing day to day? So I'm going to give like just 2 more seconds on this one, just so we get a few more people. But basically, the breakdown is pretty much exactly what I expected. No one's that excited about setting up CUDA or documentation. Amazing. So essentially, most people want to be able to perform novel data analyses. They want to be able to build algorithms to solve scientific problems. You don't want to spend a lot of time on the housekeeping portions of your day-to-day. It's something that the less time you spend on those last 2 points, the better for your productivity and also for the rest of your company. They don't necessarily want you to be doing that either. So the next portion is going to be more a day-to-day explanation of how CodeOcean would fit in with all of these different personas. The idea behind this is that, you know, we can kind of talk about all the problems that people have and all of the ways that CodeOcean can solve it, but it's more concrete to have a example of what it would look like to solve a particular problem. So this is just a couple example scenarios for each person in that group of different types and what they might do if they had access to CodeOcean. So I'm just going to start with who the personas are. So we have a company that has 4 members in it. Obviously, they're all avatars of a particular type. So we have Jane, CSO, who's the head of R&D. She is the one who is responsible for basically everything going on within her department. She's on the decision maker side, so she basically wants to be able to know what people are doing and what they did, and also make sure that there's a continuity day to day for if you have people coming and going, that there aren't giant gaps when that happens. You have Bob DevOps, who is in charge of making sure that everyone has the computational resources that they need. Everybody is going to be running things smoothly. They don't have stuff that's breaking all the time. We have John Compsci, who's responsible for data analysis and making sure that people can get information out of the computation or out of the biological data that they have, or whatever kind of scientific data they're working with. And then we have Elizabeth Bench, who is doing mostly web lab work, but she's still responsible for some amount of data analysis, data synthesis, and she's also the expert on her own data. So there are definitely going to be times where she wants to be able to investigate her own stuff. So we're just going to start with day 1 for John Compsci. So John Compsci has just been hired. And he's been told to build a model to classify cancer tissue samples as likely or unlikely to respond to a particular treatment, we're going to call it drug X, based on clinical data. So basically he shows up, he asks Bob DevOps for help. Bob DevOps adds him to their existing single sign-on directory. In this case, it's Google OpenID. And then he sets up a new base image that's out of one of the recommended images from CodeOcean that is a CUDA supported Docker image, basically. And then he tells John to go away and leave him alone, which is exactly where he wants to be. On John's side, once he gets into CodeOcean, he realizes he didn't actually need to bother Bob about getting a new GPU image. There actually is already a existing capsule in the apps library that will give him somewhere to start. So he has the ability to begin from something that already exists in the apps library. So he duplicates the capsule, goes through the README that includes information about how he runs it. He launches an interactive session in Jupyter Lab, and then he starts adding data assets for the cancer trial that he cares about. So he basically includes everything that's tagged with drug X, the study dates that he cares about, and anything that's related to glioma. So he attaches all the data assets that he needs. And then he starts playing around and trying out different things and running different versions of the model, looking at his results in TensorBoard. And then when he's happy with the model, he creates he saves it to the results folder, which automatically syncs to S3, and then he creates a data asset from it, which will be able to be shared with everybody within the organization. So one important thing about CodeOcean in general is that often what happens in organizations is you have sort of these, there's a lot of information available and there are a lot of things that people generate that just sort of live in various siloed locations. Because there's a single pane of glass for CodeOcean, it's very easy to create something that you can share with everybody who's on that same platform. So day one, Elizabeth Bench realizes that she wants to be able to run some single cell expression data and visualize the results. She basically is also on the CodeOcean environment, and so she can actually pull the Cell Ranger capsule from the apps library, and because it comes with a user interface that is including all of the parameters that she needs, she can actually just run that out of the box without making any changes to it. So she copies the capsule, she runs her own data, and then she creates a data asset from the results. However, she realizes she needs something a little bit more in depth to be able to look at the interactions of different types of cells. And so she talks to John Compsci. John Compsci notices that there's an existing R-Shiny cell capsule in the apps library. And then he can take Elizabeth's data, generate a customized visualization of it using the R-Shiny library. And then he can save that capsule and then pass it back to Elizabeth. And on her end, so here she's downloading the 10x capsule. She runs the data using the app panel, creates a new data asset, and then she passes that to John, who goes through the tutorial on how to create a new visualization for single cell data, and then saves that capsule, shares it with Elizabeth, and then she launches an interactive R-Shiny session and is able to look at her data using all of the visualizations available there. So basically on that end, you can see that there's a lot of back and forth where things can easily be passed from one person to another and easily shared once they're ready for somebody else to use them. So going a little bit further down the line, it's actually a year later, and John Compsci's model has been used to predict patient responses to drug X, and it's working, so that's great. But Jane CSO wants to know specifics about which tools and data sets were used to build the model, since the FDA has been working through the clinical validation process and has some questions about what types of data was used, what tools were used. And so she wants to be able to find that out. So she's able to ask John Compsci some of that, but she also is able to find the actual model data asset and look at the lineage graph for that particular model. And the lineage graph will show her everything that went into creating that model. So basically, all of the little blue icons are from computation capsules. All of the purple ones are from data assets. All of the little plug icons that are orange, those are outputs from a previous step. And then basically, at the end of the day, she can see everything that went into creating that model. Just as full disclosure, this isn't actually from a drug model. This is a CNV simulated data set. So basically the output at the end is just a bunch of simulated BAMs. But the idea is the same. You can see every single file that went into creating the outputs. And because it's all tracked at a particular point in time, you know exactly what the version of everything was that was used to generate it, what parameters they were used with, and also how each piece feeds into the next piece and any problems or issues that may have come from that. So basically, because you have the full picture, you can go back at a particular point in time and see what every step was doing. So I'm going to pass it back to Allison, and she's going to talk a little bit about people who have been using CodeOcean, just to kind of give you an idea of what people have to say about what they've been doing there. And we'll take some questions at the end. Again, if anybody has anything that they are burning to ask right now, feel free, but we'll also have a Q&A session at the end.
Thanks, June. Yeah, I wanted to talk through some real examples here of what we've seen with some of our customers. So the first one is a precision oncology company, and this customer had a lot of clinical data. June, if you want to, thank you. Had a lot of clinical data, roughly 12 main records, including about 500,000 with genomic profiles. So a lot of their biomarker data were coming from multiple different partner sites, and large computational models required by massive new data sets. So that meant that there were really high R&D costs, roughly millions annually per team. Bob DevOps was not happy about that. Their version of Bob DevOps there. So that includes DevOps, SecOps, DataOps, and GovOps. So with CodeOcean, onboarding now only takes several hours, sometimes minutes, instead of months. That means that the ops teams are spending a lot less time on, on the mundane tickets, which also reduces their cost per team. And now they have controlled cloud spend and they stay within their budget. So to wrap that up, they now have throughput collaboration in a secure, controlled, and consistent environment, whether working internally or with external partners. And Lantern Pharma, I want to highlight them because this is the Bob DevOps in real life. Peter Carr, he's their principal platform architect, and he wears a lot of hats, mainly IT and DevOps. There's only one of him, and he was spending a lot of the time enabling scientists with finding their code and getting them set up. So one of the things he said was, I could either code myself, which obviously is not a viable option, or find a platform like CodeOcean. In particular, he preferred CodeOcean because one, there's no lock-in, and two, you can replicate everything CodeOcean in your own stack, so there's nothing new to learn for any of the scientists. And then three, CodeOcean really puts them on that path towards reproducibility, which is really important for them. With CodeOcean, their scientists are up and running in just a few hours. They're spending a lot less time chasing down compliance and documentation, and they're on the path towards reproducibility. Next, we have a prime editing biotech company. So this one in particular, they had a messy DIY Jupyter hub that a consultant built. It was tough because no one internally knew how to support that hub, and one scientist can break the entire system. Big nightmare for everyone. With CodeOcean, they had a standardized, managed, and turnkey environment, and but DevOps is really happy because he doesn't have to maintain it and support it. All the computational and bench scientists are more productive and efficient, and DevOps can now focus on data architecture across the business. And he says, quote unquote, that's his real job. So wanted to highlight that there. And then finally, we have cider reasons, excuse me. With CodeOcean, similar thread, onboarding now only is really fast for them. They've seen increased researcher productivity, about 15 to 30%, major annual savings for DevOps, and optimized compute and DevOps costs. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to June because she's going to talk about something really exciting, which is our new apps library she's about to show you.
Yeah, so that all is kind of, what CodeOcean is about, but I did want to mention that we are introducing something new and exciting, which is the apps library. So just to give an overview of what it's about, it is intended to be a suite of tools that are ready to use out of the box. So basically, the plan behind this is that rather than these being sort of, proof of concept or things that you basically would have to edit in order to make them usable, they should be usable right away without any major changes. We are planning on providing regular updates in the form of new capsules and pipelines, and we're also planning on supporting the existing capsules, both with software updates and also if anyone runs into any problems, they can contact us on our community Slack or through our support team in order to get changes made or bug fixes or anything that would be necessary for us to make them more useful to you. The idea also is that these should all work out of the box in our Nextflow pipeline builder. So this is a visual way to build Nextflow pipelines that you can do just by basically dragging components together in an interface. So just to show you a quick look at what that looks like. You have data assets that you can bring in, and then you have capsules that take in data from one step to the next. So in this case, this is just a simple pipeline built with the components that we have in the library to do adapter trimming and then run alignment and then output to an S3 bucket. And because this is all built on Nextflow, each of these components is automatically parallelized in EC2. So basically if you have multiple samples that are coming through, they can all be launched in a separate EC2 instance. And so if you have a lot of data behind the scenes, you're already parallelizing all of that. So basically you can build pipelines in a really streamlined way. So that sort of first, step of, or that the second part of John Compsci's problem, where it was having to build pipelines, this is a really easy plug and play method to do that with this ability to still customize things if you need to, but with a much more quick onboarding to get that working. And then this is just an overview of what the initial release of the apps library content is going to be. So we have a lot of utilities that are just sort of for standard bioinformatics processing. We have bulk sequencing stuff, so you can do STAR, you can do BWA. We have also a lot of things associated with variant calling and other, so the common things that people are going to be doing in bioinformatics, just so that all of those key baseline components are there. We also have a few things that are just more to show kind of more complicated workflows. So we have a few things that are related to single cell. Our Shiny cell specifically is one where you can build those visualizations that we showed earlier. We also have some things that are intended to make getting into machine learning a lot more easy than if you're starting from scratch. So as I mentioned, there's a TensorBoard capsule available already that should be launched. You can just launch it and it'll run on a GPU EC2 instance on AWS, and you don't have to do anything to make CUDA happy or to make it visible to Jupyter Lab. That should already be set up for you. Similarly, we have MLflow. So if you have a bunch of different things that are running machine learning experiments, you can have a centralized database and visualize what that looks like from a single location. So even if you have multiple capsules that are generating models, you can look at them all in one place. And then we also have a few things that are not really genomics based, just to show sort of what else is possible for other scientific applications. So we have a couple cheminformatics capsules where the idea is you can take images that are just drawn compounds, either from a publication or things that you drew on a napkin, and then it will output a machine readable string for you. So basically it'll take an image and then produce a smile string. And then you can use that to actually calculate drug properties like molecular weights, all of the other stuff that you would need to do if you're doing more the drug discovery side of things. And then we also have AlphaFold, which is for protein structure prediction. So you give it a sequence of amino acids, and then it can try to figure out what the folding structure looks like. That one in particular is extremely time consuming to set up. And so being able to just launch it without having to do any of that is a big benefit for people who are looking at the app library. And then also the idea behind this is that we want to be able to work with customers to sort of build out what the next set of content is going to be. And so depending on what people are doing, especially if people are contacting us about specific things they want, actually a few things in here. So the GATK RNA short variant discovery and a few others were requested by one of our customers who got acquired for a lot of money recently. So that's cool and great for them. But basically we want to be able to have sort of a back and forth where people are able to use us as a resource to build out this library and have it accessible as a way to do basic bioinformatics chores without having to do as much work on your end. So that's sort of what the content is right now. We have a lot of other content that's available that is built on top of the platform, but is still needing to be added with more documentation and more information so that it's usable for people who are not as familiar with each of these tools. But these are things that are definitely coming as future releases in the platform. So we have a lot more genomics pipelines that are actually running end to end. We also have a lot more things on the variant calling side with a bunch of different structural variant types of callers, more machine learning things, torch drug and other things that are difficult to set up. Also examples using our API. So one of the things that I didn't have time to touch on is that if you do want to sort of get into that very, in-depth, being able to just use CodeOcean capsules as applications that you can call from other tools, there is an API that will allow you to do that. And that is something that allows you to even build your own web page interfaces and other things that you'd be able to do to create a nice streamlined interface if you're working with people who just want to be able to access one tool. And then also on that sort of same vein, we have a lot of Streamlit examples that are user interfaces so that people can run with whatever kind of UI they want to build. So the app panel is a very user-friendly interface for just entering in parameters, but sometimes you want to be able to have something with more complicated visualizations, with a lot more flexibility in how people can interact with the data once they've generated it. And so Streamlit gives you a bridge to do that, even if you're working entirely within CodeOcean. So that's kind of like our vision of what the future holds. But if you want to direct that vision, definitely feel free to contact us and we can, certainly help to add things that are of particular interest to you. So for example, if you're interested in like methylation, those are, we have examples of that we can definitely move into the app library in a future release. So that's kind of the overview of everything that the app library is about, and also kind of gives you an intro to what CodeOcean is. So now I'm just going to open it up to questions. In GoToWebinar, there is a little question section that's a little hard to find, but if you find it, feel free to type in questions there.
Thanks, Jana. It looks like some people found it. So we have some questions coming in. Just sifting through here. All right, let's start with this one. This is a good one. So Terry asks, how editable are the applications in the apps library? If I wanted to add packages, change versions of the software, etc., how much control do I have over that?
So these are all completely open. So you have access to a visual environment builder, so you can actually edit Docker files by just adding packages in a UI. There's also direct editing of the Docker files themselves. All of the code is open. Basically, everything in the capsule is completely open and easy to change. So you have access to everything that we do in order to build the applications.
Great. And now we have a question from George Mayhew. How does this deploy? Is it a SaaS?
So this actually is not software as a service. So we don't host anything. Basically, you have an AWS VPC that is your own AWS environment. CodeOcean is deployed on top of that. And so basically, behind the scenes, everything it's using to store environments, everything it's using to store Git, everything it's doing with S3, that's all on your own environment. And all of those interactions are, orchestrated by the CodeOcean platform, but the actual ephemera and all the data assets and everything else that goes along with it, that's all stored within your AWS instance. So basically, we don't store anything for you. It's all in your own VPC environment. If you have one already, CodeOcean can be deployed on top of that. Or if you don't have something set up already, then you can create a fresh AWS environment, and then we can add CodeOcean as sort of the orchestrator for everything that goes into it.
Great. And we have a slightly related question from Kevin. Can CodeOcean run on non-AWS?
Yes. So actually, the next version will include the Google Cloud as a possible platform. So CodeOcean is agnostic about cloud architecture. And so basically, we have AWS as sort of in the past, that's what we've mostly supported, but we're working, so Google Cloud is in the next release. And then as we go on, we'll be adding more available platforms as we need, because behind the scenes, basically, as long as we have access to the platform, we can make it work.
Great, great. And now Ben asks, what do you recommend in terms of adoption? What are some best practices you've seen for something like CodeOcean?
So one of the things that is definitely a major feature of CodeOcean is it's more useful the more that's on it. So all of those tracking of assets and all of the information that you need in terms of, making sure that things are fixed in time and that you know exactly what you ran at what time, that goes out the window if people are doing things on their own laptops and then uploading them onto CodeOcean. So the more that people are working just on their day-to-day, even if they're doing things like interactive RStudio sessions or Jupyter Lab, as that becomes more and more on CodeOcean, you can make sure that things are tracked in a way that everyone can see and that doesn't get lost when one person leaves the organization. So you don't have that horrifying moment of someone's laptop gets wiped and then you lose a bunch of tools that everybody's been relying on, which can happen.
Yep, definitely hear a lot of that for sure. Something with our customers is they always talk about how onboarding and transitions are really smooth and easy for them. Last one we have here, Bill says, no question, if I used to work in RCO with bioinformatics data every day, and this is what I always wanted, you're saving people an hour or more of work. Awesome.
That's good.
We'd like to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we would love to stay in touch with you. Is anyone going to Bio IT World? If you are, go ahead and say yes in the chat. We'd love to see you there. Come see us at booth 308. And Simon, our founder and CEO, is giving a talk on Thursday at 5 Thursday, 5/18. I believe it's around 11 a.m., but it should have that on the website and the agenda for attending. Come say hi to us. And we'd also love to stay in touch with you. Get on our monthly newsletter, codeocean.com/newsletter. You'll get updated on more events like these ones, new capitals of the month. As we release new apps on the apps library that June talked about, you'll also be the first to know as well. And if you want to see how CodeOcean can work for you and your team and really accelerate your research, go ahead and head on over to codeocean.com/demo, and one of our specialists will reach out to you and get that set up.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining me today.
Thank you, June. Thank you everyone for showing up, and we will be sending out the recording and slides later today.
Bye everybody.
Bye.